Welcome back to our virtual studio in Singapore. I hope you enjoyed that first conversation between Aaron and myself. All these conversations, again, are going to be recorded and made on demand for you afterwards. So if you have to rush away for a coffee or to take your kids to school, fear not. We will make sure that all the content is available directly after. To my left, to your right, depending upon the screen, I'm joined now by Dymfke Kuijpers, Senior Partner at McKinsey & Co. here in Singapore. Dymfke looks after a lot of the consumer brands and retail brands across McKinsey's portfolio in Asia. She works with some of the largest companies in this region and across their business strategies and goals. Dymfke, hi again. Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having us. It's cool to be in person and not on screen in these times. So.
I think Dymfke and I had a conversation, ladies and gentlemen, must have been December of last year, when we weren't quite sure how this pandemic was going to play out. It's still here 6 months on, and I think 6 months from now it could still be here. But one of the, I suppose, silver linings of this has been digital transformation, and we did touch on this back in 2020. We're 6 months on in 2021, Dymfke. Has the era of digital transformation slowed in any way? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I would not say it has slowed down in any meaningful way. I think we see consumers, increasingly moved into a new habit, accelerated by last year necessity of COVID in many ways, be it homeschooling, being it telemedicine, being it, as in your sector, home fitness. But we actually see that even when lockdown eases, the digital habits pretty much stay. So it's actually, if you take the various pieces, right, working from home, even though in the countries where lockdowns have eased and people can go back to work, companies need to make concerted efforts to get people back to work. People get so used to working at home. And you see also from an employer perspective, people thinking more of like, okay, there's a digital piece to it and an in-person piece, but not everything will be in person. So I think that's one piece. I think also if you look at shopping behavior, people have gotten into it. It's easy. So you see the shares of online shopping completely not petering, and you see the old 50% extra penetration with consumers that didn't shop online before actually kind of staying. If you look in your area, 75% of people that have in one way, shape or another engaged with digital fitness, in whatever way, shape or form that is, 75% of them claims to continue to do so. They also claim to go back. So it's not 100% digital world, so they do want to engage back in person. Luckily, we're all social animals, but the pervasiveness of digital blurring into the physical space, I don't see that anywhere stopping. If anything, accelerating still.
Okay, we touched on consumer trends that we were seeing. Again, this adoption, people getting used to buying online, shopping online. Looking now 6 months later, do you see any difference in those trends and consumer behaviors? Have some maybe increased, have some decreased? Perhaps what maybe trends are you seeing sticking for the long term?
Yeah, I think when we spoke last year, it was like these 4 trends, right? It was digital was one of them, the shock to value, the shock to loyalty, and this whole increased view on health, safety, and wellness in a broader sense. I would say that there is more because as the pandemic took longer time, particularly some areas of this world have been struck harder economically. So I think the shift to value has been more pervasive now than last year. So I think you see people more cringing. Interestingly enough, there in markets that open up again and where, that have a slightly higher share of middle class and more wealthy population, you see kind of people spend up again because people have hoarded a lot, right? But there are also quite a lot of economies where people don't have savings. They live from their daily wages. And so I think that the quest to value is one that is probably even more pervasive than last year. I think the other one that you see is the wellness, where originally there was more of a safety conversation. I don't want to go out. I'm afraid of the pandemic hitting me. I think we see consumers more and more kind of blurring around wellness and the previous speaker spoke a little bit about that. I mean, it's about better health, it's about better fitness, it's about better nutrition, it's about better appearance, it's about better mindfulness and about better sleep. So you see a more holistic, kind of out of the kind of like, let's say, instant 20% or 40%, depending on the country, afraid to go out. You see a more blurring set of values emerging around wellness than I think we saw earlier. But it's very different by country, because in China that's a lot to do with mental stress right now. People are worn out by the demands of lives. in Brazil, they're mostly talking about peace and connection. So I think there is a there's still
Very
quite
different.
some differences.
Now, McKinsey works with a range of companies, MNCs, NGOs, governments, SMEs, whatever. You're obviously looking at the strategies they're looking at, the investments they're looking at when they're investing into this new digital world. What are you seeing in terms of some of the trends that these companies are investing? And where do you think those trends will inevitably impact the marketplace? So just any thoughts, Dymfke, around we're seeing trends and strategies in digital go here and the implications of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like in your sector specifically, right, last year 2 billion went into digital globally, right, in a form of digital fitness, of which half was roughly B2C software, to your point of connecting. If you look at the large, let's say the consumer goods and the retail players, I mean, one big theme is the, let's say, broader route to consumer. So being it e-commerce, being it direct to consumer, particularly emergence. And you saw yesterday the announcement of Alibaba putting 400 million into Vietnam in eB2B systems, right? So I think everything related to how do we digitize, from farm to fork in the food world, or from supplier all the way through to the end consumer, and all the steps in between, be it from a B2B and a B2C. And I think that's a big theme that we see. I think another theme that we see is like, how do you reconnect with the consumer in terms of a world where purpose matters more even, I think, than probably a year ago. It's been, and so you see investing behind brands, but when do you want to do that? Because there's no point in investing behind a brand when if you're a beverage player in the on-trade, I mean, if it's closed down, right? So I think there's a real theme about how do we engage with our consumers. There's a real uptick in demands for personalized experiences, for meaningful experiences. And so you see that on the retail, thinking through how can I give a personalized offer, also for the fitness players, right? How can I give advice tailored to you? So I think that would be a second theme, like connecting with the consumer in a digital way, in a more personal way than previously, as a second big theme. I think a third big theme is, it's not fun, but it's necessary to survive. You see a lot of restructuring, cost outs, be that end-to-end automation, not just for the sake of because investing in the future, but also just for the sheer necessity. So probably those three big themes are relevant, at least to you. I mean, there are other stuff going on, but those would be the most relevant for you.
We've saw companies hunker down, obviously try and save cash, wait till the market rebounds. Some companies, I think, maybe are just thinking, I'll just have to wait until the vaccine gets rolled out in my company, in my country. What are your advice to these companies who are perhaps maybe just shielding down for quite some time? Should they continue to shield, or do they really need to move?
It's very hard because it's such a local situation, right? So the thing is, what we see, you don't want to be behind your competition when the things open up, right? So having a very good view on when will things start to move again, and then being ready, I think is extremely important. And what are your lead indicators that you have to say, hey, I see things moving, and doing that in a meaningful and forceful and fast way. I think the reality is that also potentially in your sector, there are some competitors that might not make it. So I think you need to be proactive, at the same time not stupid. It's very hard to give a generic advice.
Absolutely. Let's look at brand, because I think a lot of companies have had the opportunity now to recreate, almost reposition their company, their values. What advice would you give to companies that are looking to try and strengthen or recreate their brand and their values going forward?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there is a real opportunity to rethink who are you serving, who are your target customers, consumers that are really close to you and where you can connect with, and kind of sharpening that and being then really targetful and mindful on reestablishing that personal connection, I think is even more important now than it used to be before, given the fact that a lot of the mass stuff doesn't really reach people at this moment in time. So how do you engage? I see that now happening in the travel industry, right? As an analogy, I mean, the amount of reaches out and personal offers. I obviously was in a plane a lot. I'm getting in, like, let's say the last month compared to a year ago is quite big, right? So timing is everything, I think. But I think thinking through about what can I offer that is relevant to my target consumer group in a way that matters to them is the most important.
Let's look at loyalty. Aaron just talked about loyalty, and they've had very strong loyalty programs at Yang Sang for a number of years now. But there is, again, like you mentioned, this shock to loyalty. What are your thoughts around loyalty programs through a pandemic? Are you seeing customers being more and more fickle? Do people have to, redesign, reimagine their loyalty programs and how they offer them?
So I think there are three things, I think. First of all, there was a lot of foolish spending on loyalty programs. I think probably the pandemic wheeled it out on that, some of that, because it was just too bloody expensive, right, to tank stuff to the bottom line. So I think that would be one thing I see people doing. I think the other thing is I see people increasingly, particularly at the back end of a digital world, more working with partners and ecosystem and thinking through, like, I can do loyalty on my own, but is there a broader set of coalition that I can work with to just increase both the traffic that I get as well the efficacy and of the effectiveness of what I'm doing. So it would be another thing, right? So who are your partners in this? And then the third thing we already mentioned, personalization. So loyalty for the sake of loyalty is just not it, right? You just need to think through, what do I know? What's my data that I have on that customer, and what can I do to make it compelling for him or her, and what analytics do I invest behind that?
What about companies that have impressed you, Dymfke? I know that you perhaps might not be able to go so much into case studies of your clients, but of course you might have maybe more of a personal opinion on companies that you think have done an incredibly good job of turning a corner, of, hate to say the word, pivoting their business place to create new value for their shareholders and their customers. What companies have impressed you?
So I would say in your area, right, a couple, right? So one is more on the tech players going into I mean, the obvious ones, and it's a Peloton, right? It's this, what they've done is quite interesting. It's not in equipment, it's all service, it's a community. And I would say in general, on the software side, over and beyond equipment, anyone who's been able to drive communities has by far fared better. So I would say that's a theme around how do you ride the wave. Let's say it's how do you ride the Peloton wave of connected fitness at home, if you will. And then I think Swift has done an amazing job, right, at the back end. So I think it's one of the examples that has really, really fared well. But that would be one theme, and there are more out of there, and whether it's Jack Jocks or whatever. There are many of them. I think a second cluster for me is this at-home coaching for all budgets, which is a theme that we've seen come back up more in the pandemic. And they're whether that's a company like Salute or Caliber or Bolt or Present, there are a bunch of that. It's such a fragmented market still. But I think this whole one-on-one video coaching to live streaming on demand, guided exercise, and anything goes on that. And then I think there's a bunch of them that are really trying to move beyond fitness into this broader space of wellness. So beyond, let's say, the community, beyond the one-on-one advice, is there, how do you link this to nutrition, vitamins and the whole shebang? And, there are some players that are one of the brands Unilever just bought, Oni is one of the examples of it, right? But they are trying to move away from a pure, narrow defined dimension of wellness. And I think that is another trend which I find exciting, because that's what we see consumers do, right? They look at it from very different angles. So.
Yeah. I think one of the ones that's impressed us most in the past couple of years has been CureFit from India, which started off as part acquisition of the Fitness First gyms in India. They had a very strong digital presence, and they made a decision, I think it was late last year, to go digital first. And so they've built up nutrition, they've built up health services, they've built up online coaching, they've built in measurements, performance metrics, and they also have the collection of gyms. I mean, to your point, some companies truly are thinking of this very, very holistically, which is very interesting to see. Is the future bright, or is it brightest for health, fitness and wellness companies? I think coming from our network, Dymfke, we know the market is bright going forward, but how bright is it against some of the other industries, like, for example, technology, biotech, that also have very bright futures?
I think if you look at the consumer point of view, particularly in Asia, particularly in those companies who are also present in China, I think the future is brightest. I think if you take those 6 dimensions of wellness, right, on better health, 68% of Chinese consumers think we don't have enough products and services to do better health. 64% thinks we don't have enough products and services around fitness. 60% doesn't think we have enough nutrition. 68 think we do not doing enough about sleep. 65 around mindfulness, and 50% around appearance.
Wow.
So it's like the vast majority of 1.3 billion consumers. Now, this I happen to have the data in China in front of me, but I'm sure for the other countries are not dissimilar. You see a huge disconnect to what consumers want and what's out there. And so I think there's a huge white space and opportunity. So I would say brightest. And I would say Asia is actually ahead of this, particularly China, compared to global averages. So.
What are your thoughts on remote working? Because we're all finding ourselves working from home. We're all finding ourselves, if we're coming back to office, we're coming back to offices that are partially empty or hot desking. How do you think that marketplace will evolve? And perhaps how will that impact consumer behavior?
Yeah, so look, I mean, this is a very local answer, right? Because you see in the US people kind of moving back, but at the same time, the tech companies have said don't come back in the office until June 2021, yeah. Right? So yeah. I think there's quite some despair. I would say that I don't think we'll go back to a culture with large MNCs where it's 100% physical presence. I think people have figured out there is a balance between in-person and digital, and that's actually the mix is probably the most efficient. Where the balance will lie depends a little bit on how fast. I mean, we're all just working from home again today in Singapore, right? So day one. So I would say there is I would say that I don't know whether the balance is going to be 80-20 or 70-30. I don't think it's going to be 100% at work. It's also not going to be 100% at home. I do think that there is a minimum critical mass. People need as social animals to connect in person, and I think companies will push for that and to at least have some form of presence that you. Because I mean, the downside is a little bit if you're not orchestrated about it, and I don't know if you've experienced that, but I went to the office and then if you find in a good day can find 5 colleagues. I mean, what's the point, right? So I think that is the balance companies will strive for, both this connectiveness, cohesion, and then the efficiency of that some of the digital age has brought us.
Now we're going to go off piste here with we've got some time to spare, so we're going to go off piste just now.
Go for
One
it.
of the questions that we had with Aaron was the future of retail bricks and mortar, which have struggled because of the disruption through COVID. But of course, people will come back to shops. People will come back for experiences. Is that where you believe the future of retail bricks and mortar lies, in experiences rather than products? Or will it come back to value? What do you think some of the retailers, some of the operators of shops have to keep in mind as they reopen their shops?
Yeah, so I think we see mostly what we would call online to offline. So it's a full integrated experience for the customer, whether you shop online or offline. So I think often at the back end of a form of a loyalty card. Bricks is not gone, particularly not in sectors like food, right, where the touch and the experience and the inspiration and the community also matters. You do see a shift towards more experience in general, as opposed to just kind of replenishment, if you will, which moves more online. That being said, it's a very sector difference between, let's say, videos and stuff that's mostly done online versus apparel, we're somewhere in the middle, versus food, which is probably the lowest, with anywhere between 10 to 20% of their sales online. But I think the combination of inspiration, experience, and sometimes ultra convenience, right? And I think that's where online to offline will meet each other, and where B2B will again play a role. Like if you think about, particularly in Asia, how local stores are, particularly in the food space, and how easy it is to just walk down in your condo and get to the local grocer and get your stuff, which by the time you've typed it in, you're already downstairs. I think that how that ecosystem will strengthen itself with digital means is going to be an interesting one to watch.
2 questions. The first one on Omnichannel, and the second one maybe digging a bit deeper on hyper-personalization. Everyone wants to be Omnichannel. I think the reality is, can everyone be Omnichannel? What are your thoughts on some of the challenges that you're trying to work through with customers or friends as they're trying to build their business into a fully Omnichannel?
Yeah, I think that so I think you need to make a conscious choice. It's either all in or not, right? There's very little in between. Doing a little bit is kind of pretty much useless. And then there's a choice like, what do you do yourself versus what do I do with partners? Because I think there are very few companies can do everything themselves. I think some of the biggest challenges when you think about omnichannel and digitization of your business, it's actually people and culture. It's just so there's always a technology conversation, right? What are your legacy systems? What does mobile first mean? How do I get the technology in place? But the actual reality, it's about, how do I get the mindset completely differently? And if you look at the digital natives, overly focused on customer experience compared to, our traditional companies who still have a bit more profit focus as well. A real cross-functional agility that, many of these retailers are perfectly functionally siloed, optimized for, execution across thousands of stores, right, which doesn't help. I think the KPIs and incentives are very much, today's weekly sales will not be improved by going online. So how do I now actually at the back end of COVID, that's positive because it is. Profitability is also slightly better. Yeah. But I think that is the whole weekly steer versus the investing in the future is a real issue from a KPIs perspective. And then the sheer capabilities. I mean, who really understands what digital analytics can do for your business? How do I then evolve that into a digital sales channel? What does it require in terms of tooling of my sales force if I go out into a D2C model? And I think that's the actual, the combination of focus, target setting, cross-functional way of working at a much higher speed, and then the individual capabilities. I think the positive at the back end of COVID is companies have been forced to work much more agile. So you see, we have this speed indicator diagnostic. You see people have cut through the cloud of complex organizations, and you see actually the back end of that, people moving faster than they did before.
And then the second part, hyper-personalization, which I think, again, is another topic that people would love to do. I think people would love to be able to be that brand that offers absolute unique bespoke solutions and services to every one of their clients. But that's a very complicated and sophisticated process to do. What do you think some companies can do simplistically just to maybe enhance hyper-personalization? Is it all about technology? Is it about perhaps just the personal touch? What is your thoughts on the future of hyper-personalization?
So I think that in an online, offline blurring world, right, it's hard to just make it personal touch for humans. So it's trying to get a single view of your customer and understanding who is my customer and that you actually recognize that customer regardless of whether the person, is on your app or in the store or wherever you are, I think or talk to your sales force is kind of helpful. I do think it's hyper-personalization by itself from a technical perspective is not terribly complicated. You can get literally algorithms running in 6 weeks, right? So that's not, I think the real nuts and bolts come in the last mile. How do you anchor it? How do you link it to, if you're doing product sales, how do you link it to your POS system? If you're doing services, how does the person who gives the service know it, right? So there's a much more last mile part of it. But if you think about, maybe you start with a view on the customer, even if you start at a broader base segmentation and you say, okay, am I at least targeting this at the segment level, understanding what that person looked before you go all the way through to hyper. I think you can get going at least in a decent way, and start simple. I mean, the old 50 years ago, the shop owner on the store knew everybody, and it was a hyper personalized service because he knew that you were consuming, I don't know, whatever cheese you consume. So there is I don't think it's, I wouldn't make it too big. Just keep it simple and move step by step.
One closing thought. How have you been keeping your own mental, physical, spiritual health and well-being positive over the last month?
I think I've tripled my kilometers on Strava. No, I mostly run. So for me, so we did I always used to be a runner, and I ran more. I think the other thing, we got 2 COVID puppies, so we walk with the family puppies. So I think that's bringing a lot of enjoyment and fun, and particularly now again that we go in lockdown, at least the kids have a bit of a schedule on when they walk the neighborhood, which is helpful.
Good. Well, look, Dymfke, really enjoyed that conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you did too. Pleasure as always. All the very best to you and the family. Enjoy the dog walks, and we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll draw this to a close. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes with our next speaker. Thank you.